Good morning, Morai Rabotai, Beruchim, Habayim. We are continuing on Masachet Rosh Hashanah, and we are on Daf Tet Zayin, Amud Bet, 10 lines down from the beginning of the wide lines. Today's Amud is being learned as a Zchut Refuah Shelema for Rachel, Simcha, Bad Nahid, Daniel, Moshe, Ben Farangis, Vavraham, and Gilda Torbati should have Refuah Shelema. Today's Amud is also being learned as a zchut for the neshamav Kianush Pinchas ben Ovadia. This Amud is being learned the zchut Sharona bat Sohela Chaya Simcha for finding a proper zivug. And this week's learning of the community has been graciously dedicated by the Shei family and Mahbubi family. It should be an ultimate zchut for all their mishpachot. Amen. So we left off a little last prat to discuss the Gemara of Chayav Adam La'akpil Penei Rabo Baregel. We mentioned there are two places in Shas that this Gemara is brought, over here in Masachet Rosh Hashanah Daf Tet Zayin Amud Bet, and also in Masachet Sukkot Daf Chaf Zayin Amud Bet. Whereas over here is Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Chayav Adam La'akpil Penei Rabo Baregel. Over there in Masachet Sukkot, the Gemara starts from a different standpoint of a story told by Rabbi Yisraeli visiting his Rabbi Eliezer Agadol, Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanus, the Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer fame. He goes there on regular, shows up expecting a Yashikoyach, expecting a Chazak Ubaruch, and instead he gets scolded by his Rabbi. His Rabbi says to him, in the language of Gemara, he says, you lo mishofta regel, are you not keeping Yom Tov? Says, says, Ilahi, la mishofta aregelata. And the Gemara says, because Rabbi Eliezer Agadol held that a person should not be moving away from his place on Yom Tov. He should stay with his family. Meshabeach ani et ha'atzlanin. I praise the lazy ones that they stay home and don't go anywhere because they have to be staying with their family. The Gemara says, well, is that true? We learned in Masechet Rosh Hashanah that you have to go to your Rebbe on Yom Tov. And Mar says, well, that's only when you could go and come back the same day. If it's within the tchum, within the vicinity, you could go and come back. Then you could have both, the best of both worlds. You could go to your Rebbe and still spend time with your wife and children, and that's fine. But if you have to choose one of them, being with the family trumps being with your Rebbe, seems the Gemara's maskana in Masechet Sukkah. So we spoke about the fact that Rabbi Simcha Bunim Sofer, the grandson of the Chatam Sofer, actually observed a minhag of the Hasidim in Poland, and he says, in my place, in Preshburg, also in Galila Tachton, the Hasidim do this. And he says, well, how do you deal with the Gemara? And he brought the Rambam who says, only the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, and skips the qualification of being close to your home, perhaps paskening like what Maran Shulchan Aruch says in Kesef Mishneh, that maybe we don't pasken like Rabbi Eliezer. In most places we don't pasken like Rabbi Eliezer. Maybe this is one of them as well. So therefore we are left with going to visit your Rebbe on Yom Tov. We also mentioned at the very end that the Nodabi Yehuda Rabbi Cheskel Landa already had discussed this question, mainly wondering why the Shulchan Aruch doesn't bring this halacha. If it's a clear-cut halacha in the Gemara, why wouldn't that be one line in Shulchan Aruch that you should go to see your Rebbe on Yom Tov? Rambam brings it, and he explains based on the Gemara in Kiddushin Daf Lamed Gimel that Rabbi Yanai holds there in the Gemara that you only could respect your Rebbe as much as you respect HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So you say Shema twice, you accept Ol Malchut Shamayim, you get up twice for your Rebbe. More than that, well, certainly not Mechuyav. It's the Asur, it's not Asur. Certainly you're not obligated, because that would be respecting your Rebbe more than respecting Shamayim. Shelo yeh kavod rabo gadol mikavod Shamayim. Says the Rabbi Yehuda, therefore, because we know, and we mentioned the Haflah as parenthetic ma'amar, that Haflah says the reason that you're chayav to go see your Rebbe on regel is because it says, Shalosh pa'amim b'shana yira'eh kol zechurcha, Et penei Adon Hashem. Et, we always know it's coming to add, and when it's talking about Et Hashem, is l'rabot talmidei chachamim. So just like you're mechuyev to go see Hashem, you're also mechuyev to go see your Rebbe. Says the Rabbi Yehuda, based on that, now that we don't have the Beit HaMikdash, you're not going to see shalosh pa'amim b'shana yerai kol zechurcha. You're going to be makpid on going to see your Rebbe. That's going to already be gadol kavod rabo mikavod shamayim. Therefore, the obligation doesn't apply. Rambam, who brings the things of the Beit HaMikdash, the halachot of the time of the Beit HaMikdash, and Hilchot Kodshim and Ta'arot and all that, he brings this halacha. Shulchan Aruch, who does not bring the halachot that do not pertain to this generation, he skipped the halacha altogether, which that would completely answer the question and obviously avoid the question that the Shevet Sofer was trying to deal with, because then it's not at all an obligation, and automatically you would have to perhaps stay with your family anyways. Now, all of this being said, the fact that the pasuk says "V'samachta atau betecha," atau betecha is zu ishtecha, right? Isha Bala mesamecha, says the Gemara. Now, obviously, the maskal of the Gemara is that you buy her jewelry, you buy her clothing, but there is that aspect of v'samachta atau beitecha. It's not that Rabbi Eliezer is coming from nowhere. The source for that would be that a person should be really happy with their family. To just bring a similar Gemara. Similar Gemara, not obviously the same, but the Gemara in Eruvin Daf Samech Gimel says, a person that goes and sleeps in the bedroom of a husband and wife. Imagine a guest. There's no place for him. He comes, he sleeps there. He's a guest. And says the Gemara, this is a violation of et neshe ami tigarashun mi bet ta'anugehem. It's a wrongdoing. Right? The Meiri writes, the Gemara says, even if she is nida, still will be asur. Why is that? Because you are developing a situation in which they're not comfortable talking to each other. And as the Meiri explains, anything you do to separate between a husband and wife, imagine this is a one-nighter. And one night he's going to stay with them as a guest, has no other place to be. The pasuk says bad news, because now they can't schmooze the husband and wife privately with each other, and that you're taking away from the ta'anug of a wife is to be able to speak to her husband. And now you're there, it's not comfortable, it's a bad thing. Now imagine, where else can't she speak with her husband? When he's not home, right? He's going to a different place for Yom Tov. It is Rosh Hashanah, you want to give the brachot to the children, right? And have a Seudat Yom Tov, Oneg Yom Tov, right? With the family, and he's nowhere to be found. That also obviously is something that the person has to be mindful. Now, obviously, with a grain of tremendous caution, you have to be dealing with minhagei Klal Yisrael as something very serious. This has been a minhag in Klal Yisrael, as the Shevet Sofer says, for years. This has been a minhag for years, and some people feel really blessed to be able to go and spend the time with the Rebbe. Their wives who grew up in those families also feel the same way. If a person has that type of scenario, obviously it's a different setting. Versus a family that the wife really would appreciate, would want the husband to be there, and she's not saying anything because I give in over here, you give in over there. Obviously, that's a different reality. Or a person that doesn't have a wife and children, and he comes from a non-frum family, and he wants to go to a place that is uplifting and carries him through the year of inspiration. As obviously, different scenarios call for different judgment, and hence a person should have a Rebbe, right? That's all of that, grains of salt, or maybe a whole bucket of salt, being taken in consideration. In abstract, you have to notice that a person that's leaving Eretz Yisrael to go to somewhere else for spending the Yom Tov, obviously he is over potentially on an Isser of leaving Eretz Israel, and it doesn't necessarily fit one of the three heterim that the Gemara brings that exist for leaving Eretz Israel. It's not for getting married. It's not for parnasah. It's not for kibbutz. It's not none of those things apply necessarily. So you have a real question: is it mutar to leave Eretz Israel to go somewhere else? Aside from the fact that the Gemara says the tefillot of Moshe Rabbeinu was not Moshe Rabbeinu didn't even daven for certain things in Eretz Israel until Yehoshua came and did, because, says the Gemara, Moshe Rabbeinu was not in Eretz Israel for his tefillot to be powerful enough. Can you imagine? Like, you want a day of powerful tefillah of Rosh Hashanah, you certainly don't want to leave Eretz Israel to go somewhere else, aside from the fact that it would be taka a problem of leaving Eretz Israel not for legitimate enough of a reason, but even being in Chutz La'aretz and leaving. The Gemara, for instance, says, Kol hakovea makom litfilato Elohei Avraham bezro. If a person has a makom kavua, this is where I daven, right? Now it's a bet knesset. In a bet knesset, having a makom kavua, certainly not leaving town for no reason. That, especially on Yamim Tovim, that would be something important as well. And one little anecdote also, you have to know where the sources of these things are. For instance, if you have a promise from a tzaddik that, whoever davens at my kever, I will help them, right? So, for instance, Plei Yoetz, the Rabbi Eliezer Papa, a tremendous figure of Torah, Musar, he writes in his sefer that people who help his neshama, he's going to promise to be an advocate on their behalf, because they're learning his Torah, and he is being elevated, and he will in turn, which makes sense, right? But the fact that you come here and automatically things are going to happen, well, if he would say it, that would be amazing. How about a sefer that was printed 65 years after someone died? No source that he wrote it, he said it, because obviously you have to take that with a grain of salt as well. And many times there's students of students, and so on. So even if you have a little safek whether or not they said it, you have to take all the opposite things a little bit more serious as far as whether or not this has legitimacy or not. So therefore, this is one of those things that obviously we have the Rambam, obviously we have the Gemara, but at the end of the day, people should have a private, competent Rav and Moreh Ora'ah that knows them and knows their family and can tell them, I don't think it's kedai for you to do, or I think it is kedai for you to do this year, and so on, and trust that judgment again in a spirit of respecting a Rebbe. A person should have a talking, walking, living Rebbe that they have that personal kesher with, that they could ask that level of itzah and trust the itzah that they get. So that being said, again, this is a beautiful, complicated, and fantastic sugya, all in all, and we cap it there, without further discussion. But nevertheless, the Gemara now says one of the most famous Gemarot. By the way, in regards to going to Uman, right? In regards to going to Uman, Chacham Obadia used to speak about this almost every year. He was against it. And again, I'm sure there would be many cases that if they would ask, he would say, no, for you, you should go and draw some inspiration if you don't have a wife and children. He was mainly against the fact that people would leave their wives, their children. There's no way to take the children to the shul, as sitting by the table there without the father being there and so on. He was very upset with it. And one year he didn't speak about it. Every year before Rosh Hashanah he would actually use his podium and his mic to speak about this. So one year he didn't. The next year afterwards, so he joked about it on the Motzei Shabbat shiur. I said, they said last year Harav didn't talk about it. He was choser b'tshuva, right? He changed his mind. He said, what? Some people think this is Maaseh de Uman. You're going to Uman. and he joked about it, but at the same time that he was very humorous. Nevertheless, he felt very strongly about the bond of family not being broken for pretty much anything, unless, again, a person, his situation at a given time requires that type of a big move, and they should discuss it with the Rebbe. Now, that being said, we are going to start one of the most famous Gemarot in Masechet Rosh Hashanah, one of the famous Gemarot in Shas, and that is the 3 books that are opened on Rosh Hashanah on the Day of Judgment. HaKadosh Baruch Hu opens 3 books. Says the Gemara, Amar Rab Keruspedai, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Shlosha Sfarim Niftachim B'Rosh Hashanah. There are 3 books that are opened on Rosh Hashanah, Echad Shel Reshaim Gemurim, Ve'echad Shel Tzadikim Gemurim, Ve'echad Shel Benonim. One is the people who are purely evil. The other is people who are purely righteous. And then you have the Sifran Shel Benonim, the regular people. The people who are not fully righteous. They are also not wicked. The regular Benonim. Says the Gemara, Tzadikim Gemurim Nichtavim Menechtamim La'altar Lechaim. The Tzadikim immediately are written on Rosh Hashanah to a life, to a year of life and prosperity. Now, Ramban writes in his Chibur on Rosh Hashanah that when we talk about this, he wrote an entire kuntrus on this Gemara, basically, right? And he says, when we talk about Chaim Umavit, we're not just talking about life and death, but any loss, any difficulty, any Yisurim, that is part of Nechtavim ve'Nechtamin Lemita, and any prosperity and happiness and health and all those good stuff are part of Sefer Chaim together. So it's not that every person is either written to death, and the Rashaim who are written to death, if they didn't die by the end of the year, it's like, well, right? Since death has many subcategories of negativity as well, and so does Chaim. So says the Gemara, that's for tzaddikim. Reshaim gemurim nichtabim ve'nechtamim la'altar lemita. The wicked people, they are written and sealed immediately to die, and the benoniim are tluim ve'omdim. They are hanging in a balance from Rosh Hashanah until Yom Kippurim. Rosh Hashanahvad Yom Kippurim, zachu. If they did tshuva, says Rabbeinu Hananel, that's what it means, zachu. If they did proper tshuva, then nechtavin lechaim, they're going to be written to life. Lo zachu. But if they didn't wake up and do tshuva, chas v'shalom, nechtavin lemita. Well, so you would ask an obvious question over here, right? The obvious question is, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is always mateh kelapei chesed, as we say in Tachanunim, right? Hashem always tilts things to good, right? So 50-50, Hashem already would give a discount, right? So if a person is Benoni, so he's not a Tzaddik Gamur, but he's not a Rasha either. He's a Benoni. And he just didn't do anything. Didn't do tshuva, and comes the Shata Ne'ilah, and he's still hanging in a balance. Hashem says, let's kill him, right? How does that work exactly? Aren't you supposed to say, well, he's a Benoni, let's tilt it to the good, give him another year of chance? Why does this Gemara make any sense altogether? And obviously, the answer is because their greatest sin is not doing tshuva when you have the ability to do. The fact that he didn't do anything between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, he didn't wake up and smell the coffee and try to do tshuva and add some masim tovim, that by itself is what's going to tilt his mishpat, his judgment, to negativity, because he didn't do anything when he could have, right? Sharat tshuva starts with a mashal like this, right? That there was this prison, that people were in the prison, and somebody broke the wall and made a tunnel and all the prisoners left, right? And the guard comes in the morning, says, everyone is gone. One person stayed back behind, right? And the guy is like, and the guard says, you miskin badbacht. And he starts beating him up. He says, what do you mean? He says, you should have gone. You had the thing open. Why didn't you go? You char, right? You should have gone, right? And that's exactly the mashal. You have the tunnel open, right? We're going to see this in the upcoming daf. Seek out HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He's there, and you could do it. The fact that this fellow didn't do it between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, that by itself is considered the seal of his negativity, because that by itself is an avera. The fact that he could have, should have done tshuva and he didn't, by itself is considered an avera, and that is going to seal him lemita. Says the Gemara, Amar Rab Avin, Maikra, how do we know this? Says that there are three svarim. And says the Gemara, because the pasuk says, Yimachu mi sefer chaim, they'll be wiped away from the book of life, ve'im tzadikim ali katevu. And with the righteous, they will not be sealed or written, right? Yimachu mi sefer, the fact that they will be wiped away from the sefer. Who's going to be wiped from the sefer of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Those who are going to be written to death. They're going to be wiped away from the world. That's Sifran Shel Reshaim. Those are the wicked people. Now, Chaim, when it says Sefer Chaim, Imachu mi Sefer Chaim, Sefer Chaim is pretty obvious, right? There is a Sefer Chaim. There's a book of life. So that is Sifran Shel Tzadikim. That's the Sefer of the righteous people who are written there. And then at the end of the pasuk says, Ve'im tzadikim al yikatevu, the people who are not going to be written with the tzadikim. So what are they? You already said, Imachu mi sefer, right? Imachu mi sefer achayim. So they are going to be wiped out. So these are not Rishaim either, but they're also not Tzadikim. They're not written with Tzadikim. Says the Gemara, Zesifran Shel Benonim. That is the account of those people who are not Nishtahin and Nishtaher. They're not here and they're not there. They're not Tzadikim, but they're also not Rishaim. So they're considered Benonim. They're hanging in a balance, waiting for their tshuva. By the way, this mindset is the mindset of the 10 days of tshuva, as the Rambam codifies it. A person should imagine himself that he's mamash e benoni, right? Chetzio chayav vechetzio zakai. Asa mitzvah achat. You do one mitzvah, you're tilting yourself to chayim. You do chas one avera, boom, right? Goes the other way around. And says the Rambam, that's why the minhag in Klal Yisrael is that in Aseret Yimei Teshuvah you do a lot of mitzvot. Even those things that you know you're not necessarily planning to be keeping after Yom Kippur, for instance, Pat Yisrael, right? Normally speaking, Pat Yisrael is a chumrah in certain aspects of it, right? Now, Maran Paskins in Yoredah, in Siman Kuf Yud Bet, in Sif Dalet, Sif Hey, certain things that a person should be machmir, but you have it. Pat palter, a baker's bread, as long as it's kasher, would suffice. Comes Aseret Yimei Teshuvah, everyone is machmir on Pat Yisrael. You'll see all of a sudden everyone is buying Pat Yisrael. Everyone is buying Chalav Yisrael. Many people stop carrying in the Eruv even on that Shabbat of Shabbat Shuvah. One Shabbat, the whole year round they could be carrying Shabbat Shuvah. We're not so mech on Eruv. What happened? Well, they are developing a chumrah, right? Another thing is many people who still have not started keeping Yashan, for instance, right? Which I have no idea why not, right? Everyone should be. But at least comes to the 10 days of Teshuvah, everyone is keeping Yashan, right? And Shcharuch actually speaks these examples because, well, some of them, because this is how we deal with these 10 days, based on this Gemara over here of Rav Kirus Padai, because the person is hanging in a balance, and the mishpat could be tilted based on what they do in those 10 days. So says the Gemara, this is the Sefer of Tzadikim, and the Gemara brings another raya for it as well. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar Mahacha, he says from a different pasuk, Ve'im ayin, Moshe Rabbeinu is discussing with Hashem, he says, Hashem, please forgive Klal Yisrael, Ve'im ayin, and if you don't, mechenina misifrecha asher katavta, wipe me away from the Sefer Torah that you wrote, misifrecha, from the Sefer that you wrote. So says the Gemara, mechenina, this wipe me off is Sifran Shel Rashaim. Those are people who are going to be wiped away, Rashaim. Misifrecha, your Sefer, is Zeh Sifran Shel Tzadikim, Hashem's Sefer, the good people, right? Lo Igur Chara, bad people are not going to be on the Sefer of Hashem. So Sifrecha is the Sefer that the name of the Tzadikim is written. Asher Katavta, Zeh Sifran Shel Benonim. Asher Katavta is the third one. It's not Rashaim, it's not Tzadikim. So what is it? Benonim. So it says the Gemara now, we out of time, I just realized, the Gemara is going to discuss now the three different judgments that we have on Rosh Hashanah, which is a topic of its own, a fascinating, beautiful topic we'll, Be'ezrat Hashem, continue to discuss in the next shiur. Chazak u'baruch.